up, Neil?
Hey, Cal. How are you today?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Thank you.
So here we are, season 3, episode 1, and we're coming in strong this season.
Absolutely.
So as you can see, we are not in the normal studio. We are actually recording this from Old Nation Brewing.
Yeah.
And here we have Travis Fritts.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Owner and I guess Master Brewer, and thank you for welcoming us to the pub here.
So thanks for coming out on the coldest day of the year, man. I'm glad you guys got here.
It's all right. No, it was about 25, 30-minute drive.
Oh, that's not so. You said how?
Yeah.
Right on.
So no, it's awesome. One, Old Nation has been a staple of two dudes since day one. I mean, usually we'll always have the beers lined up and you crack them while we're talking with everyone, but it's been a staple for me even before two dudes. I've been enjoying M43 religiously for years now. And just seeing some of the other things and now trying them, it's amazing the amount of beers that you offer.
Yeah.
Tell us a little about you, like how'd you even get into this, and then we'll get into some of the other stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Music side.
Well, it's in terms of brewing. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I came up around here, around Lansing, it wasn't like there was a lot of money flying around or anything. So my introduction to beer or making beer was actually out of necessity, right? So I grew up in Lansing, in and around Lansing. Not a ton of money flying around, so the way I got into beer was a response to that. I had a bunch of friends, played in bands and all that. It was easy at the time. This would have been the late 90s. To go to a show. If you were playing at the show, nobody carded you or gave you any problems, so you'd have a couple beers or whatever. Played with some Irish bands, so Guinness was like a big thing, you know what I mean? And so all that. And I'd also spent time in Germany, in Munich, particularly as an exchange student in high school, where I got turned down to drinking really good beer. Even sort of the pedestrian German beer drinker has an opinion about what it is that they're drinking. It might be like well-informed, or it might just be kind of a horse shit. It's not just I drink Bud because I like Clydesdales and tits, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like, well, this one is better than that one because of this or that history. And again, it might be all BS, but it's like informed in some way. And so that's kind of how I was introduced to it. But in any event, so we're going to these shows. I'm getting paid to play these shows, so I feel like, Midwesterner like the rest of us, I probably shouldn't be getting drunk, you know what I mean? But just be very, sort of cautious, and I'm also underage. And, but I was really turned on to the idea of like having beer when I wanted it, right? And having the kind of beer that I wanted to drink.
Right.
And
especially in the 90s.
Especially.
There's only so many options that were out there.
Yeah.
But I will say Michigan, from outsider looking in or living here or whatever, it was like seemed like one of the first ones to really grasp that whole craft brewery.
I think
thing.
it was. And I think it was.
Colorado seemed to be kind of like the two
For
really
sure.
start.
Well, and
I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, and as we talk about music, I have an aunt and uncle that are just a little bit, 12, 13 years older than I am, and they've really turned me on to a lot of music. You mentioned Colorado. They lived in Fort Collins. So
Fat Tire. That was like one of my first ones that wasn't a Michigan.
Yeah, Odell's 90 shilling. They'd bring back growlers of that, and they'd give me a little tiny taster or whatever. Wonderful beer. And here it was like, that was when Bell's was still Solson, and they were kind of using, fish tank thermometers to ferment. It was like primal,
like old school.
Yep.
I remember Solson.
Yeah.
I still tell people that all the time.
Oh, big
time.
You
get to like the throwback shirts.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It was nuts, and it was great, and it was wonderful, but it wasn't like it was like music back then, right? It was cool to find a band that nobody else knew that was dope and turn them on to it.
Absolutely.
And in retrospect, you can go back to some of those CDs and be like, I can't believe I like that, and turn people on to it. You know what I mean?
But they still love them to this day.
Yeah,
and
sure.
They're like, oh my God, Travis turned me on.
Yeah, right. But it was about the finding of it, because it was hard to find shit. You know what I mean? That was, that's a whole other topic.
No, you're true. And then even like, we love live music, and then it's like finding that band and seeing them.
Waiting to come. Are they going to come?
For us, the biggest, me and Neil's right there with me, was Wilco.
Yeah.
One of my favorite bands ever.
Yeah.
And we saw them at the Majestic in Detroit, where it's like 1,000 people. And they played like their first 3 albums, almost the whole damn thing was like 30 songs.
Yeah.
And then you watch them grow, and it's like you're almost proud of it.
Right. Well, and then you're proud that like, oh, I was listening to them when they were Uncle Tupelo, and then I mean, Sunvolt came out, but they had that one song on the radio, but it kind of blew. But Wilco was really, like the thing. Right, and
then you like all 3 of them.
You like all 3 of them, right? But you were like proud of that, you know what I mean? And whether I'm not saying Solson wasn't good, it was good.
Right. No.
But it was just cool to know it.
Right.
But what I was looking for were those German beers, and there were specialty shops, especially around East Lansing, like Odie's Big Ten. You could get wheat beer specifically, which traveled pretty well because it was generally bottle fermented. The Pilsners didn't really as much. So anyway, whatever. If I could get one of those, I'd get them. But I wasn't like a big beer drinker, And in terms of making beer, there was actually right here on this corner in Williamston, it's a place called Keller Plaza. It's a really old building. There was a homebrew shop. And at the time, you could buy all the gear you wanted to brew beer at any age. There was nothing illegal about that.
Right.
So that's what we did.
Like people who have grown the hydroponic.
Yeah,
You can buy
right.
whatever you want.
Yeah, maybe you're making your own tomatoes. Yeah,
Tomatoes.
right, exactly. Yeah, this guy fucking loves tomatoes.
He's got houses growing tomatoes.
Exactly. Right. So we went to that, to that shop. My uncle, the same guy from Colorado, Dave, he had brewed beer at home. And, we were a family that, again, didn't have a ton of money, so we cooked from scratch everything. And it wasn't a big deal to, like, if you can use a pressure cooker and you make bread, then you can definitely make beer, right? It's not that hard.
Right.
And
I remember even like kind of the late 90s going to a lot of people were making beer, and then some still, you'll hear about it, but it was like a big thing for a while where everyone was doing it.
It was, yeah. And, the Charlie Papazian book,
And
The New
some
Joy
guys
House
just
Mumbling.
become famous overnight,
Just like me. Yeah. Right. And so, I bought all the stuff. I was 19 or whatever, and my roommates and I would just make, 2 cases of beer at a time, and we'd make whatever sounded cool in these homebrew books. But it wasn't I also baked bread at home. I wasn't really like, oh, this is a passion of mine and I'm going to be a brewer. It was just a cool thing to do. Or I thought it was a cool thing to do. And so anyway, all that happens, and I'm going to Michigan State. I'm going to community college in Michigan State, and I'm trying to pay as little as I can to get through college. Working a lot, 2 or 3 jobs, working at a guitar shop, Elderly Instruments here in Lansing that we talked about a little bit. I had a little demolition crew that would go into malls and demolish the walls and build back up to studs and whatever we could do to make money. And then play shows a lot. Whatever, like a cover band would need a bass player, at the Silver Dollar, if you're familiar with the old Sleazy D.
Yeah, right.
And that was all like frat dudes.
Yep.
And it sucked, you know what I mean? But you make $300 a night for playing some horse shit, like the big peak of the show I remember was a medley of theme songs from 60s TV shows. Who cares, man? But, it's Friday night and you just made $300 cash.
Yeah,
so
right.
anything we could do to make money.
Absolutely.
To try and finish college. And what turned out to happen was that the student teaching requirements at Michigan State went from a semester to a year. So that's a full-time job, student teaching. You're paying for tuition and you're not getting paid to work.
Yeah.
And it was going to be tough.
Yeah.
But I spoke German, and I had been an exchange student in Munich. And my German teacher from high school, her husband was a professor at Michigan State. And I'd met him and talked to him, and they were like, "Look, dude, you can finish college in Germany. You speak German well enough. It's free, pretty much. So if you've got enough money saved up to finish just to pay tuition here, you can live off that money and finish college in Germany," which was true. So I looked into it, and I went to a technical university, to the Berlin Technical University, which sounds way fancier than it is. The technical universities over there are essentially, there's 2 tracks you can take. When kids are, like, 10 or 11, they decide if they're going to go sort of more trade-based route or a more, like, liberal arts route, right? And you can switch back and forth, whatever. If you decide you made the wrong decision, it's possible to change. But those students that go the trade route end up in these technical universities. And so they'll be specific to any number of different trades. But generally they'll specialize in something. And so the Technical University in Berlin happened to specialize in food science, which I loved the idea of.
Absolutely.
And so I went there and ended up being, through a course of happenstance, recruited into their brewing school inside that university. And again, like I had homebrewed, but I wasn't like, oh, it's my, like I've unicorned into my passion or whatever. I was just like, fuck, if you're going to pay for this, then I'll do it. You know what I mean? Because I want a degree, you know.
You're going to pay for it, I get a degree.
Hell yeah.
Whatever I got to do.
Right, I'll go back home and make Twinkies or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And so I did that program, and was an apprentice and a journeyman, and later became a master, and graduated from that university, and then came back here, and now it's like 2000.
How long did you spend in Germany then?
About 2 years that
2
time.
years. Okay.
And now it's like 2003. So Bell's is for sure established, right? Two Hearted is like just coming out,
Love to.
like being a thing, you know what I mean? Which
Founders was around.
Founders was around, but they had just gone through their kind of like metamorphosis of, the story that they tell of making the decision for making beer for themselves instead of for the distributors or whatever. And but that it was all happening right then. And there was a place here called Michigan Brewing Company,
Okay.
which closed in 2012, I think. And is a whole other story that I won't tell. But anyway, it existed at that time. And the dude who owned it was this kind of megalomaniacal dude, you know what I mean? Like he had come from like helicopter sales or something, you know what I mean? Like this was all just misfits, and it still is in brewing, you know what I mean? But especially at that time, it was like dudes who they got drunk one night and then read an article about the new gold rush was beer, and they're like, fuck it, I'm taking my 300 grand that I got saved up and I'm opening a brewery. And this guy did. Parents had some money. Anyway, so he opened this brewery, he goes through and he does this thing, and he decides that he's going to buy the Celis Brewing Company. So the Celis Brewing Company is, you guys remember the movie Boys Don't Cry?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're drinking Celis beer in that movie. People from Texas, Oklahoma, pretty much anywhere west of the Mississippi that were drinking beer in the 90s will remember Celis. It was opened by this dude named Pierre Celis, who is the guy who resurrected wit beer at Hoegaarden. Hoegaarden was his company.
Okay.
In Belgium, and he ended up going to Austin because he liked warm weather and bolo ties and shit, and I'm not joking. That's why he did it. And he always used to wear a bolo tie. He's a little guy, Pierre, but he's an incredible guy. Opened up Celis and Miller, who were flirting with the idea of Coors and Blue Moon at the time.
Right.
Had pretty much said, look, here's this, the cost of even a regional brewing company, even now, the cost of buying a regional brewing company and brand for a brand like Miller is a rounding error in their accounting at the end of the year. It doesn't matter, right? So they approached Pierre, who was, at that time in his probably late 60s, early 70s, and were like, hey, what do you think? We're going to buy your shit. And I wasn't there for it, but apparently he said yes. And so they bought it and immediately torpedoed the brand. And so it was just sitting in mothballs. All the equipment the brand wasn't doing anything. I don't think they were brewing it at all. And Bobby Mason found this out, this dude I'm talking about, the wild dude, and bought this brand from Miller. Brought in some old, Miller dudes to help him set it up, and Pierre and his partner Jean-Luc Seiss, who did all the Unibrew recipes, so Trois Pistoles, La Fin du Monde, all those Belgian beers out of Quebec. He was also in his 70s, came in to sort of oversee the use of Pierre's name, the Celis name, here in Michigan. And I just happened to be coming right back into Michigan out of Germany at that time. And I'm from this area. So I went to the brewmaster there. His name was Dan Rogers. He's now brewing in Florida. He's an incredibly good brewer. And brewed for, actually started Griffin Club. Does he in Florida? He does, but I don't know what the name is. It's like a pub. He makes he distills there too.
Okay, nice.
But anyway, he was a chef in Las Vegas, and then ended up brewing out there at the Spotted Cow, and then came back here to Michigan, where he's from. Again, and I don't say this derogatorily. I mean it really positively, but he was just one of these misfits. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we get it.
Just a weird.
Well, it's like any of those early industries that are like on the brink of booming, right?
Right.
It takes think about like the
Right.
computer, right?
Right.
And Jobs.
Right.
And Bezos.
Right. It's well, I mean, it's the kind of guy, and it still kind of is, but particularly at that time, it's the kind of man, woman, person who is going to be willing to spend 20 hours making a beer when shit goes south, because there's no chance they're going to let that go wrong. You know what I mean? They're going to stick with it.
Yep.
And that's a really particular kind of person. And I think that you find it in trades and in the working class more than anywhere else. But anyway, this guy Dan's there. I went over to Dan. I'm like, look, dude, I'm this German brewmaster now, right? There are only 16 of us. Right. There are only 16 of us in the United States, and I was 23, I think.
That's crazy, though, right?
Right. And so Dan's boss, the guy that owned the company, was like, oh, I'm about to get a German brewmaster for nothing, right? Which he did. And Dan was like, fuck this kid, right? Which he was right to do, right?
Right.
Because absolutely, I knew I could recite to you, the citric acid cycle and yeast metabolism and whatever.
But you never ran it.
I mean, I had run some bullshit, right?
Right.
But I'd never been in a situation like America where we were using, this is no bullshit. You think about a lab, right? You think about a lab in a brewery, and you're going to be thinking about, hoods and autoclaves and, stacks of pristine glass that you would use, and distillation and all this kind of stuff. Dude, at this place, we were using big pickle jars and votive candles to make anoxic environments to plate and grow yeast. It was ridiculous, you know what I mean? So all this stuff that I was prepared for had absolutely nothing to do with the way that people were.
Reality.
Yeah.
Just like school in general.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, right. So if I had gone and worked for Budweiser straight out of school, which you can always do if you go to the VLB at the Berlin Technical University, then it would have been exactly what I expected.
Right.
But this wasn't that. So anyway, what I got the chance to do was figure out all these MacGyver ways to do these scientific processes that I'd been trained to do, which was awesome. But I also got to work underneath, because I spoke some French too, Pierre, who spoke English but just didn't like to, and spoke French, he's Belgian, and Jean-Luc, who spoke German and French, and also English, but he didn't like speaking English. That was kind of their way to, what I mean?
I deal with plenty of,
right.
of French and
Like,
stuff at work.
You know what everybody's talking about, dude. You don't need me to translate for you, But anyway, so I could, and they, appreciated that, and they appreciated that I'd gone to the VLB. They both knew that school. And so the VLB is the brewing school within the Technical University in Berlin. And so they really took me under their wing, you know what I mean? I'm this 23-year-old dude. I needed that real bad, right? I wasn't coming back thinking I was going to take over the world either. I knew how ridiculous it was to call myself a brewmaster, right? Especially after the first couple months,
But having, all that knowledge.
These guys really were masters.
Right, they were in the industry forever. So being able to just, when you first come out, having the credential, but then getting that kind of tribal knowledge. Being able to meld those two together.
And so it was this 23-year-old dude, me, right? And these 70-year-old guys who were in the middle of Michigan. Like the thing that Pierre thought that was coolest about Michigan was a town called Milan, right? It was Milan, Michigan. Right? But every time we drive past that, he'd go, "Oh, look, Milan!" You know what I mean? Regardez-vous, Milan! And
Anyway, so Lollapalooza '93.
Lollapalooza '93 was in Milan. I was not. No. So anyway, there's these two 70-year-old-ish dudes who had been doing this since they were, in their early 20s, and me, a dude just starting out, and they didn't have anybody else who came from the European perspective of brewing, which is way more technical, right? And I don't mean technical just in terms of science. I mean, look, the goal is making this product, And these are the ways that we need to make this fucking product, right? It's not, we're all starting a fucking punk band and it's a brewery and not a band, right?
Right.
Who cares, right? And so they really liked that perspective. And so they totally took me under their wing. I spent tons of time with them, one-on-one time after work. We're telling stories. This may resonate with brewers, but probably not people who aren't. When you're fermenting in a big tank, there's a hose that blows off gas, right? As the fermentation happens, it's blowing off CO2, yep. And, bigger breweries, that'll be vented straight outside now, and most American breweries is vented into a bucket or whatever. So, Jean-Luc, who was the better brewer of the two, according to both of them, and again, had been doing this job for 50 years, right? And again, we're talking about, this dude started brewing during the Second World War in Europe, right?
Right.
That's no bullshit, dude. That's fucking nuts, right? This guy Pierre, it's not true, but one of the legends about his thing was that his family owned a dairy, which was true, and it was near the Ardennes forest, which was also true. And it got all their cows got shot up in the Battle of the Ardennes forest, and he had to figure out what to do with all the equipment, and so he made beer. That's bullshit, but it's a dope story, And anyway, but they're the legends. These are guys who had stories like that about themselves. They were fucking legends. And they were out here in the middle of a cornfield with a kid who'd just come back from Berlin, and they just wanted to teach me whatever.
How does that even happen? How do those worlds align?
It's just awesome.
It's crazy.
And I didn't know anything about Belgian beer, right? I mean, I understood that it existed, right? But I hadn't studied it or really drank much of it. And so I got this, absolute kind of, as intense an education on Belgian beer as you can get from these guys. Here's how you do it if you're cheating. Here's how you do it if you're not cheating. Here's how you do it if you kind of want to mix a little bit of cheat but not. And this is how you fool the people who think they know you're cheating, but they don't if you do this, right? Fucking sweet. It's a trade, right? Brewing. So imagine like being anything, right? Like a plumber or a carpenter. Or, who cares? Anything.
All those tricks.
Right.
Make your life easier.
Right.
Allows you to do other things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's just great.
Frees up time.
And also just learning from these guys how to be a cool old guy.
Right.
There's really something to that too,
100%.
Anyway,
It's a total package.
It's the best.
And it's a genuine relationship. You're learning.
Yeah.
Whether they would admit it or not, they probably learned quite a bit from that 23-year-old as well.
Maybe. But and then also we had Dan Rogers, who was and still is one of the best brewers I've ever met in my life. You know what I mean? But from a straight American perspective, he borrowed from a lot of stuff. He was very well read and educated. But he was the amalgam of all the European styles that brewers at that time, the best brewers at that time were, right? I've learned a bunch of English beer. I've learned a bunch of Belgian beer. I've learned a bunch of German beer. This is the beer I'm making as an American with the American ingredients that I can get, which is the birth of the American West Coast IPA, for example, right?
Yep.
And then later the hazy IPA and all that shit. So anyway, that's how I started. And then from there, I just got different jobs and worked for different crazy fucking owners who don't own breweries anymore, and partnered up. It was a lot of different jobs in this course of about 2 or 3 years. I was a journeyman. But I ended up in Detroit at a place called the Detroit Beer Company, working with a couple of partners, young guys. One of them still has a pub, I think in Royal Oak. And then my partner, who is my partner now, Rick Gersey, this is kind of where I started the business end of the whole education under Rick, who was already a very successful businessman on his own. And then it just kind of progressed from there, man. I made a couple of different beers. They did pretty well. I hooked up with the Sanders Chocolate Company, made a beer with them. That did really well. And it was enough to get a big multi-million-dollar loan to build this place, fast forward 9 years or so.
Right. Yeah.
I was brewing it and making the beer that I made in different places. So I would go to a brewery that was struggling, help them just technically, right? Like, this is how you make better beer for less money.
Right.
And this is how you train your staff and get them to actually do what it is that you need them, just tradesmen stuff.
Continuous improvement.
Right.
And train your staff.
Train your staff. right? Give
Blocking
them
and tackling,
ownership.
as they say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the easy stuff.
Fundamental
People
shit.
fuck up all the time.
It's easy until you have to do it every goddamn day for 5 years, right? It's easy to understand. It's hard as shit to do. You know what I
absolutely.
mean? But a lot of these guys would come in as, these brewery owners would come in as, whatever. They were in finance, they were attorneys, so many fucking engineers, right? And the engineers were the worst because they, of course, already know everything about everything, right? And it's like, man, I get that you understand the concept, right? It's good that you understand the concept. But understanding how to fit a brew house in that space is not the same thing as understanding how to increase the space so that you can have a more efficient brew house, so that you can actually make fucking money on the beer that you brew, right? And then brand it as something that anyone will ever give a shit about, right? It's dope that you're an engineer. God bless, right? But and that was that time, right, between the late 90s and let's say 2015 or so, where I look back on those times of work here, and I mean, that field is just littered with the bodies of these really cocky people who blew their whole retirement trying to open up breweries, and weren't doing that blocking and tackling. Some were, and it just didn't work out. You know what I mean?
Well, one, you gotta have good product.
You gotta have good
product. I mean, it doesn't matter how fancy you're.
A lot of them did, man.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, Michigan Brewing Company is a great example. Dan Rogers, those were all his beers, right?
But then, I think that's where, as I always thought about this as like a business owner, you have the ones that start, it's great, but eventually they either get bored of it or they don't have the all-in attitude anymore.
Yep.
And then there's people that I talk to, kind of like yourself, that you never lose that.
No.
And you're like, how do I get better?
Right.
What other products can I make? How do,
Right.
And shit like that. And that's what kind of separates it. And that's where, because back then when Michigan breweries, I mean, it seemed like they were popping up all over.
Oh, dude.
All over, yes.
I mean, you remember.
And some of them, they're great.
Right.
You'd go there, but there wasn't something about it that said, I have to keep going there.
There was a grocery store. I lived on the east side of Lansing, right? So in between the Capitol and Michigan State. It's a bunch of artists. That's what it's always been.
Yeah.
And there was a gas station down there, Speedway gas station, and they had some craft beer. And I remember this exactly. It was Founders, Bell's, Raffy, and Local Color. And at that time, no one had any idea which one of those would end up being the big brewery. Raffy's was as easily going to be the biggest one as Bell's or Founders.
They were all good.
They were all new,
Local Color, was that the one like in Novi?
It was in Novi, yeah.
Okay, I remember that.
Yeah, and they had the other German trained brewmaster who went to if I went to the Michigan State he went to the Harvard of, you know what I mean? This dude went to the Vice. He's still writing technical papers. Ken Bailow is his
Probably
name.
still getting A's on him.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, like for the industry.
I know.
He's an incredible brewer, Ken Bailow, but he was their get.
How did you come up with the name Old Nation?
We built the facility, we'd engineered the equipment, we had rigged a lot of it, and we were about 2 or 3 months away from opening, and I had no idea what to call it. Everybody's like, you should call it Fritts, that's my last name, and it's an easy name to remember, it sounds German, it sounds like a brewing name,
Right.
I thought that was pretty lame, and so I didn't want to do that. Anyway, we were getting a bottling line built in South Carolina. Big, huge fucking bottling line built in South Carolina, rebuilt. And this guy calls me who's rebuilding it. His name was John. Calls me up on a Tuesday and says, hey, man, I just killed a dude with a fork truck on accident, and my whole company is going bankrupt, so your shit is all in pieces. We'd spent $400,000 by then on that bottling line. So your shit's all in pieces, and if you don't come down here and get all your pieces and put them on a truck in the next 5 days, you're going to lose everything, right?
Holy shit.
This is how I got the name Old Nation. So, of course, I had a newborn at the time, like a 1-year-old. And I talked to my wife, and I was like, dude, I have to go. You know what I mean? I'm going to drive down to South Carolina. I didn't have money for a plane ticket.
Right.
And so I had a Chevy Cruze with stick shift. And I drove
Loaded up with conveyor.
Yeah. I drove it down to Cheraw, South Carolina. It's right across the North Carolina border. And started calling in rigging companies and trucks, got all the stuff out of there, and there were a couple of days where there just wasn't anything going on. And I was still, I was thinking, well, I can use this trip down. There's shit's named, they're cool names down south, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's the Crimson Tide. I mean, it's like cool shit, And I'm like, well, so I might see something. And so everything I'm looking at, I'm like, would that be a cool brewery name? Would that be a cool brewery name? And the road that this facility was on was called York Southern. And I was like, man, that sounds kind of cool, like maybe York Northern or something, something about it. Anyway, the cross street right before that facility was York Southern and Old Nation Road. And I was like, oh, it's Old Nation. That's like subliminally been the thing that I was thinking of would be a cool name. And I thought it was a cool name because we started this company, my brewing partner Nate and I started this company to make really traditional European style beers. So nobody was really doing that at the time. This has been 2013, 2014. And so we, I was kind of thinking about, how do we bring that to the fore, and that's going to be our shtick, you know what I mean? It's what we're really good at, are these super technical old world beers. And so I thought Old Nation, that's it, Old Nation Road, Old Nation Brewing Company, and that's how it came up.
I love it. So when did you open the brew pub though?
2015.
Oh wow.
So yeah,
Actually, I moved to Howell in 2016. Been drinking your stuff forever. Never even thought, hey, it's only 25 minutes down the road. But I did come in one time, like incognito, after we started talking. I'm like, well, fine, I gotta go in and check it out. And food was great. It was such a great atmosphere. Getting the flights of the beer, absolutely. And I mean, when you first Old Nation Brewery, you got your company and everything. How many beers did you actually have kind of like lined up before, like when you first started?
Five.
Okay.
So I've been doing this, as I say, for a while.
Right.
I've been selling beer, I've been brewing beer, I've been doing pretty much every job you can do within a brewery by then. And I knew that if I had five, I could get 5 6-packs on the shelf at Meijer, Kroger, Spartan. So I could go right into chains, which means that, a 10,000, which at the time we built it to be 10,000 barrels a year, brewery would be served by about 5 beers at about that volume that I expected. Because up until 2014 or so, I mean, if you were making good beer and you had it in 6-packs, you were selling beer, right? It was about making it efficiently and running your company smart, right?
Yeah, not putting each cap on by hand. I know a lot of people started out.
Exactly.
Wait, they make a machine for that?
Yeah. It's the bane of every packaging manager's existence. That machine, actually, it's just as hard to do it with a machine. It turns out. Anyway, so. It was all structured, right? I'd written a full business plan. We'd sold it to banks. I mean, we started. This was a big investment.
Well, absolutely. Which is why you're probably still here. Also,
I suppose.
The right way. You start shooting from the hip.
Right.
Fuck yeah!
Well, here's the thing. As it turned out, right around that time, we opened up in 20. So this is our 10-year anniversary, right?
Yep.
June 15th will be 10 years.
Okay.
And so my youngest son was born on the 25th of June, 10 days after we opened this place. So it's easy to remember. And so right around that time was when all of that changed, right? Because right around that time was when the way people talked about beer completely changed also. Now people have smartphones, now they're on Untapped, now they're using social media to talk about beer, right? It's not just kind of what's at the store and, I haven't tried this, let me try it.
I mean, a lot of it was just word of mouth. Or you show up with your 6-pack and people are like, hey, what do you drink? I'll try it.
I think it's still
people on.
Yeah, there still was word of mouth for sure, and that's how we got by up until that point, but it definitely started changing.
If you didn't catch on, you were getting left.
And we did, right? Because my whole thing was, I'm a fucking brewer, dude, right? I'm good at this job. I'm going to make really good beer.
It sells itself.
Yeah, what do I got to do? You know what I mean? Which was stupid, obviously. And so that was the way that we did it. And, all that beer was good. And then we had a dry stout that we caramelized sugar and using called a black sugar stout. A Scottish ale, which is like a table ale. It's generally around 4.5%. It's what you get if you ordered a beer in Scotland. Weizenbach, a bunch of beer like that. pale ale, rye pale ale. Good, really good beer. And put it on the shelf, and it was like the entire state of Michigan was like, oh, there's a new beer. Who gives a fuck about that? And then just kept going, you know what I mean? So we had beer we had to buy back. I mean, it was bad. Because we went hard right out of the gate, you know? And so I think we put ourselves in a position where we had to really come up with something quick. And, by the time we were buying stuff back, it was, we'd opened in June, and now it's, 2016, and it's probably April, right? And I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So we started doing these, pub release beers, which we're actually doing again. Some of these beers, Ghost Meat's back on. And those weren't really hitting. I mean, they were really good, but I was like, what do these people want?
Couldn't find what they were actually looking for.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Like, what do they want? And I wasn't going to go on these Facebook groups or whatever, because for, my opinion and most other brewers' opinions, dude, all these guys are doing is just ripping apart beers, right? Like, that's what it's for.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to do that. And then I had to, so I started doing it. And
I've learned that.
Yeah.
I went from no social media to all of a sudden with this doing it, all this stuff is cool.
Right.
It's like a whole other job.
It's a whole other job.
To be good at it and actually get out there.
Well, right, especially if you're creating something that you're putting out there for people to consume, and 75% of it is like, fuck you. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's hard on you,
Oh, yeah.
And so, anyway, lots of stories about that. But the point is, out of that came this opportunity where these people were talking about New England IPA. And Nate and I had studied a lot. Sapporo had written a paper on something called biotransformation, which happens to hops during fermentation, or can. And the paper that Sapporo, this Japanese Pilsner brewery, had written was like, here's how you stop that from happening, right? Here's how you prevent it. It just so happens it, at the time, was thought to be a really important thing for New England IPAs. And at that time, it was like Heady Topper, all happening in New England, right? Trillium, Treehouse were like these destination. It was really just cooking and building up. And so by, I think August of 2016, we've been open for about a year and a couple of months. The pub was doing okay. My wife had taken it over. She'd been working in restaurants forever. She completely turned it around. It was good. It was doing okay. We were doing okay, but I didn't know how much longer we were going to be able to go like this, because I had spent a ton of money on all this equipment. Anyway, so we'd done all this research, Nate and I, about hazy IPAs. We went into this Facebook group, and they were talking about how they make it. And like they always do, these guys were like, well, this is how they get you. You know what I mean? Nobody's trying to fucking get you, dude, right? Everybody's trying to figure out this beer, right? Relax. A, right? And B, you have no idea what you're talking about, right? And
is that where you throw out the Master Brewer from Germany?
I didn't right off the get.
That had to be dropped off the table.
Yeah. But I did go in and say, look, this is from the research that we've done a fair amount. We've never even really tasted these beers because you had to go there to get them at the time. But from what we understand, and from having worked with Pierre Celis on wit beer particularly, we think that it's really kind of a misnomer to even call this kind of beer an IPA. It really is just a strongly dry hopped, really strong wit beer, which it is. And this is how you would do these things in order to get this end result. And it was long. It was a long explanation. And what I expected was these guys to, again, be like, oh, that's awesome, go fuck yourself. You know what I mean? But instead, what a large group of them at least did was like, oh, that's awesome. That's cool that a brewer's actually talking to us, like, not talking down to us or really trying to sell anything. He's just explaining this.
Right.
So I was like, well, why don't you guys come out, get a dozen of you or whatever, and come out and we'll make one of these beers and we'll show you what we're talking about. So, and I knew I'd at least sell 7 barrels of beer because our little pilot system was 7 barrels. And cool, so about a dozen of them came out, some of the moderators of this page and whatever, and came out and made this beer. And at the time, Nate, my brewing partner, and I were like, look, they don't have to be hazy. this whole haze thing is really a gimmick. So we're going to make one that's not, kind of like Heady Topper, and we're going to show you how that is. And so we made it, and they came back in 2 weeks, and they drank it. This whole group came in. It was our busiest day we'd ever had. And they were like, yeah, it's fine, but, I mean, it doesn't look cool at all. And we're like, oh, wait, you know what? You're right. It matters a lot. Let's go ahead and we'll make sure we get it. So we went back in, rewrote the recipe, and made pretty much the same beer, but now it's holding haze, right? The semi-permanent haze, it's protein haze. And that's where M43 started. And from then, I mean, we had functionally an empty brewery that could do 10,000 barrels a year. So we shot right up to 10,000 barrels a year pace in about 6 months.
Wow.
And then we started buying new tanks and rigging them with chain falls by hand and setting them up.
Now
and,
you're talking my language.
Yeah, right? Filling them up and, packaging them. I flew out to San Diego to buy a 3-head manual canner. That lasted for about a month. Then we had to buy a 5-head automated canner, then a 10-head. I mean, so we were it was that kind of move fast and break stuff, just growing, yeah.
The boom happened with it.
Yeah, it was
and
M43.
Now, all the other things,
right.
Now everyone's getting that interest. Oh, what else do they have?
What else do they have? Right. And so, yeah, but that was how it started, and it really was M43. And I know, there was this kind of thing where I had said at some point, we were really struggling, and M43 really saved us, and it did. But, I mean, understanding, too, that we had been open for like 16 months when that happened, you know what I mean? We were the biggest brewery that had opened in the last 3 years just based on what we had sold, even though we had to buy back. We were going to find a way.
Right.
It just happened to be M43, and I couldn't be happier that it was.
No, and it sounds like it was all by chance.
Kind of, yeah.
Getting into that social media stuff.
It's right. Like they say, man, like what is luck, right? Luck is the perfect crossing point between being prepared and having an opportunity. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
That was great.
Dude, I love hearing the whole story about Old Nation. Like I said, it's been one of my favorite beers. Obviously, we're going to get into some of this music now, but this is
Please.
what I think. You mentioned, so M43, when would you say it would actually launch? Because this now puts into a timeline my story about
I'm going to say we probably did our first canning run where we did a release out of the pub in October or November of 2016.
Okay.
Somewhere in the fall of 2016.
And then getting, into on tap.
That would have happened February, March of 2017.
Okay, so that's pretty close.
Yep.
So one of my, like I said, from day one, I remember seeing it. It was the 4-pack. To me, it was like you said, oh, it's a new beer. And to me, it's like, oh, it's a new Michigan beer, too. You always look for the Michigan
Sure.
Because now you're seeing more and more from all over.
Yeah.
And I've always been the Michigan guy. And so I'm like, wow, well, this M43 is awesome. And you have to roll it because it's got the sediment.
Yeah.
You got to roll it and get it.
Yeah, we stole that straight from Belgian wheat beer
That's
bottles.
awesome.
That's the whole graphic and everything.
And so then, it became, and then I was telling you earlier, I go to this Mumford & Sons show.
Yeah.
And me and my wife were going. We got room at the Shinola in downtown, the most gorgeous hotel. That and there's a list there. Like if you want to buy something, it costs this much. Basically saying, don't steal shit. Right?
Yes.
We know your type. Right?
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, we go to Harry's right next to LCA.
Yep.
And I was like, holy shit, they have M43 on tap. I had never seen it on tap. I'm like, this is like the perfect storm. I got a hotel. I don't have to drive from the concert. I had at least 3 before.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Then
you go to the show and I'm having more.
That's a lot.
The next thing you know, all I remember is hearing my name at about 3 in the morning and what the fuck are you doing? And because I proceeded to pee all over the lamp in the corner. I didn't get billed. I don't own a Shinola lamp. Shit happens.
Listen,
right?
there's a step
We all
down.
have
Right.
one of those.
That's
I've said it before. It's out there.
the step up, there's a bottom step that's lower than that, and that's pissing on yourself. So, in my mind,
He looks at me. I did that a couple times.
You actually did that on the hill at Pine Knob one time.
it's not. Well, I mean, if you're outside,
There's levels.
there's people around, and there's always context. But yeah, man, that's bad, but it's not the worst.
No. It's funny. It happened years ago, but it's funny because it was literally right when that was coming out and getting into the bars and everything.
Yeah.
'Cause I was, again, didn't know the full story. So I love hearing about it, love hearing how you got the name.
Yeah.
And how it was almost like a comedy of errors at times, and I'm sure you got so many more.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's if there's a takeaway from this, it is the same takeaway that everybody who ends up being at least moderately successful at everything would give you, which is just keep getting better and keep going.
Yep.
And shit will or won't happen for you. But here's the thing, and I tell my kids this too: there is zero chance anything's going to happen for you if you're waiting for it.
Absolutely.
Right? If you keep pushing, it also might not happen, but at least there's a fucking chance.
There's a chance.
Right?
And you know what? If nothing else, you might find something you have passion for.
You got
you're
it.
doing.
You got it.
That's what we do here on Two Dudes.
Yep.
And when I forget, it all started. Our little connection was, like I said, I always drink the beer, and then I was seeing like your release. I was like Solus or
Solus, yeah.
And then I'm like, shit, never tried that. And then I came here, just watching the amount of people that come in just to buy beer and walk right back out the door.
Yeah.
Because I don't, by me, I might not be able to get some of these different variations.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so I remember commenting on a thing, and I forget someone like your creative.
Our creative director does social media now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can pay somebody to do that now. Thank God.
Yeah, so he said, hey, check your messages, and we went back and forth, and he told me, hey, Travis is a huge music guy.
Yeah.
He's in bands, and I'm like, shit, this sounds like a match made in heaven. And so we've been working on this for a few months now.
Yeah.
Back to last year, so super happy, but I want to learn more about kind of the music side of it.
Yeah.
I feel like we're similar in age, when we were talking about bands and stuff.
Yep, I graduated in 97 from high school.
Okay, I was 93.
Yep,
95 here.
Yep.
So we're all right there. So, do you remember your first concert that you went to?
You sent me these questions in advance, man, and I fucking agonized over this question. I don't think I remember all of my first concerts. I don't remember which one was first.
That's all
Very
right.
first one, yeah.
The one that kind of sticks out.
Smashing Pumpkins at the Breslin Center in '94.
April 9th, I was there.
nice.
Were you there?
Holy shit, dude.
Yeah.
So I have my list of top 10 shows, and I don't put them in, I just put them in chronological. Let's take your pick.
Yep.
And the Pumpkins are 3 of them. That's one of them.
Oh, dude, was that? I was 15 years old. You must have been like 18, 19.
I was a freshman in college.
Dude.
I skipped my University of Detroit Mercy all sports banquet because I played soccer. Actually, I'm in the Hall of Fame there.
In spite of this?
I skipped our banquet to go to that show.
Dude.
And we were directly across the stage, about like halfway up.
Yep.
And I don't know, do you remember like the first note Billy Corgan
Yes.
hit, and everyone just rushed to the main floor?
Yes.
I ended up front row center on the rail like this.
So in front of Corgan,
Uh-huh.
I'd have been like 4 people behind you.
Oh,
No
serious?
shit. Yep.
That's hilarious.
Dude, that was one of the best shows.
I smoked my first cigarette that day.
Awesome. Awesome. I might have done something. I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
But I had, there was this girl that I went to school with, and she was really cool, really pretty. She was also into Smashing Pumpkins, and again, my aunt and uncle are going to come into this all the time.
Awesome.
Same 2 people. And my uncle worked for the State Journal. He was like, I can get you tickets, man. Do you want to take this girl? And I was like, hell yes. He's like, cool, man. I'm going to pick you guys up. I'll drop you guys off at the Breslin Center. And again, it was 14, you know what I mean?
Right.
So this is a big deal. I'll drop you guys off at the Breslin Center, and I'll leave, right? And I'm going to come back and pick you guys up around 11 or whenever the show's over, right? So you got, like, this is a big deal. So for me, it was all of that with this, this girl and everything at 14. And like the dopest rock show ever.
I mean, that was in support of Siamese Dream.
Dude!
I mean, so all you had was Gish and Siamese Dream.
Unreal.
And then I always go back, look at the set list.
Right,
like
yes.
Setlist.com.
I never have.
Oh, I went, since started.
I remember him playing Mayonnaise,
Yes.
for sure.
Dude, so I went December 12th, 2 months ago, to Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. And the show was absolutely amazing.
Corgan's a Chicago guy, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So it was a hometown show.
Nice.
Aragon Ballroom, which I'd never been before. And they played Mayonnaise. They played a cover of Ziggy Stardust. He played Landslide all by himself. So songs that I hadn't seen ever or hadn't seen in 20, 30 years.
Isn't it wild, too, about these 90s bands like Smashing Pumpkins where, like, I think objectively, this is one of the best. People that, like, my parents were young when they had me. They were like 19, right?
Right.
So the records I was listening to was like fucking Boston, right?
Yeah.
Cool shit that, you know, you put headphones on and it's in stereo and it's ping ponging and you're
Right.
like tripping with no drugs when you're a kid, you know?
Right.
Man, and I always think about the Pumpkins kind of like a band like Boston, and I know that's corny and people don't get it, but dude,
Because they weren't,
you know what I mean?
they weren't your typical grunge band.
No, hell no.
They weren't even close. And I mean, he used to say that all the time, and he always gets shit. But you know what? I've seen him 5 times since May of 22 because they
Right.
write like #1.
Right.
Easily, I have my Forever 5. They are #1. The other 4 pick and choose what order.
Right.
And so anytime I can, I go see him.
Okay.
And this show at Aragon, I compare it to State Theater in '96 before there was a Fillmore.
Yeah, I didn't say I wasn't.
That was the Melancholy tour, and it was like 7 days before the keyboard stopped. And, like, from
Melvoin, yeah.
Melville.
Oh, yeah.
And he
yeah.
was the brother of Wendy in Prince's band.
Okay, right on.
And the other thing I learned about that, another fun fact about the guy that died, unfortunately, was Sarah McLachlan's super sad song with the dogs that everyone can't stand is about him.
Dude.
I'm like,
Wow.
now he's competing with dogs.
Yeah,
Fuck.
dude. Yeah, that's sad. That's sad as shit.
But no, so it was like, it took me back to like, that was being that close on a small venue, and they sounded great.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, I miss Darcy. I don't miss Darcy at all. Jack Bates on bass fucking kills it.
That band is Billy Corgan
Right.
and,
And-
my man on the drums. What is
Chamberlain.
his name? Chamberlain. Jimmy
That's why-
Chamberlain.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the one album that isn't on like social media is Zeitgeist, which
Yeah.
is from 2007, where Corrigan and Chamberlain got back together and it was just them. But people that have never listened to it are like, oh, I hate all the new Pumpkins.
Right.
But if you listen to that, all it is hardcore drums
Dude.
and guitar driven, the whole thing.
I mean,
that's the backbone. Eha's cool, but you know, other guys
But
can
think
play.
about, I'm the kind of snooty musician, music fan, right?
I am.
Yeah.
I've softened my edges.
You know, me too, but it's still there.
Because, you know, with this and some
Right.
people like people, I'm like, fucking, hey, how do you like that?
Tell me,
But I can't do that.
You guys tell me if you're like this then at all, right? Bands that I like. Almost every band that I like, I really like one album, and the rest of them are kind of like, fuck it, I don't really care. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Smashing Pumpkins is like that to me. I like Gish. I think it's cool. But Siamese Dream is where
That's
I
the-
entered, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then Melancholy came on, and I was like, I don't care about this. You know what I mean?
You know, it's funny you say that because they are like my biggest. Like, I stopped with Melancholy, but even that, I'm like, man, I wish they just would have made one album with all the really good
Yeah,
songs,
dude, just
you know?
stop.
And like some, it's funny though because like some I don't even realize were on it that I've heard live. Like Ugly.
I don't
they
know.
only come out at night, and like some
Yeah.
of them more, I wouldn't say obscure, but like
Deep
that's a
cuts.
cool song. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, deeper cuts off of those. So it's like, all right, because to be honest, I don't need to fucking hear Zero and Bullet with Butterfly.
Oh
Wings
my God,
And like the
dude.
same fucking retreads.
1979.
1979
Yeah.
tonight.
Oh.
And the things like for 3 shows in a row, I saw it was Corrigan and Ehan acoustic dude tonight. Like that was super cool the first time.
Yeah.
And I actually said before, like the next time I saw him, like, but I don't ever want to see that again.
Right.
I will see tonight if you play it normal, like the full band. You know, 'cause I
100%.
haven't seen that. And you know what? The next fucking time I saw them, they did.
They
I'm
did.
like, okay, that was
Right.
cool. But I
Okay,
don't,
right.
now I still
Yeah, I
don't
get
really
it.
need to see it anymore.
All right. Well, I'm not trying to drive the conversation, but we're
No,
talking
it's
about
not.
this. Like,
Cool.
Smashing Pumpkins to me is like,
Excuse me.
like you know, this, like it's back to rock and roll, right? And most of the grunge bands that I liked really were back to rock and roll, right? I didn't really get off on like Pavement and
No.
the Melvins or anything like that. You know what I mean?
I consider that was kind of before my time.
Right.
You know, so you hit with like the Pearl Jams or Nirvana, your
Yeah.
gateway, and
Yeah.
then I found others.
Right.
And that's where like, for me, Screaming Trees, even though they're
Screaming
one of the
Trees,
biggest ones,
Mark
I mean,
Lanigan.
Yeah, like that band was fucking amazing.
Amazing.
His voice was amazing.
Single soundtrack.
Oh,
Anybody on the single
any-
soundtrack is
Yeah.
what you're saying, pretty much.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And,
Right.
you know, the one that Neil, I remember you brought up to me because, you know, Mad Season when Lanigan
Yeah.
and Wayne Staley
Yeah.
sing on Long Gone Day or whatever.
Yeah.
That song is amazing.
Yeah.
And they have 2 of like the most iconic voices.
Yeah,
to come
but
out.
totally different.
Oh, yeah, totally.
You know, one's like super camels and whiskey, and the other one's like insane. So here's the question to you: right around the same time, and then 94, 95 or so. The tune came out on the radio. Everybody knew it. Everybody still knows it. It's in Chrysler commercials and stuff. It's called Stars by this band Hum out of Champaign, Illinois.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
You got your Forever Five and all this. They are in mine for sure, and one of the only rock bands, I'll say, that I have loved every single album those guys have put out, and have no idea why they weren't the most gigantic band on the planet, man.
We all have, like for me, because it's funny you say that. A lot of it is when like you said, your entry into the band almost, right?
Right.
And some of them, you hit it and you may have an album and you're like, man, that's fucking awesome. I love them.
Yeah.
PJ Harvey was one of those for me, right?
PJ Harvey's incredible. It's not
and
my
like,
thing.
oh my
really.
God, she's awesome. But
Right.
I really knew Rid of Me or whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything else, but I saw her last September at the Cathedral in Detroit. I was blown away.
She seems like one that would still be great.
And she was great, but
Yeah.
it goes back to like some of those. And like the few that I would say Wilco, I followed them throughout.
Yep.
Probably the last one CD I bought was Yankee or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, but Ghost is Born, since the whole live album, I got
Yeah.
to know that.
When did Yankee Hotel Foxtrot come out? 2002 or 3?
Probably, I was gonna say
Okay.
very early.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, and then Ben Harper's one,
Yeah.
where I followed him kind of throughout. But other than that, like a Pearl Jam, never. After like
Yeah.
Anthology, I gave up on it.
I
Not that
kind
gave
of
up, I
did
still
too.
like 'em.
Me, same.
But I saw him this last year, and I'm like, I was seeing all these set lists and everything.
Yeah.
I saw him in Indiana. I'm like, my set list sucked. I saw one song off of Versus, and I'm like, to me, that was their best fucking album.
Yeah. I mean, Pearl Jam was huge, formatively, you know
Absolutely.
what I mean? 10 and Versus for sure.
Uh-huh.
And then Vitalogy for sure, too, was like, okay, this is how weird can a band,
Right.
know,
Oh my
like,
God, they're so different
turn
now.
into, right. But I loved it.
Right.
And then I think Yield? No, it wasn't Yield, it was the one with No Code.
No Code.
Yeah, it came out, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of.
I'm not going to go to any more Pearl Jam.
Yeah,
shows.
and
I've
that's
done it now.
Yeah, that's when I stopped. But I did see them. I saw them. This was another one of the definitely top 5 concerts I ever went to. But I saw them. You remember when the Free Press used to do lottery ticket drawings for big bands when they'd come around? You'd send in your. I can't believe people did this. You'd send in your Social Security number to the Free Press, and they'd select who got tickets by the Social Security number.
I can't believe they did this.
They did it though.
Right.
And I got 2 tickets. So my Uncle Dave and I had a broken ankle, I remember. He drove in a stick shift fucking truck with a broken ankle to Detroit.
Column?
Yeah. No, it was on the floor. It was like one of those little ones. Yeah, man, all the way to the Masonic Temple. And saw Pearl Jam on the Versus tour in a lottery show like that.
That's awesome.
At the Masonic Temple, dude. It was unbelievable.
I see. I
that
saw.
would've
It was the I want to say it was the Versus tour. It would have been '94 as well. But at Chrysler.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, this was like the beginning of their whole Ticketmaster thing, I
Yeah.
think. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. So you mentioned Hum. Who else you got in that Forever 5?
Oh, God. Well, snooty musician bands, mostly, unfortunately. I think my favorite band of all time is a band called Vasen out of Sweden, Vasen. VA umlaut, actually, SEM. AEN. And they are a folk band, actually, that is. See that silver rhinoceros?
Yep.
That rhinoceros's name is Roger Talroth, after the guitar player in Vasen,
Nice.
who has a famously broken nose. And for famous to the 3 people that love that band. But
We're familiar with that. We got tens of followers
yeah,
here. With 3 dudes.
exactly. The ones of great fans there. Yeah. But yeah, it's an incredible band. They came out, incredible musicianship. It's a viola and an instrument called the nickel harpa, which is like a keyed violin with these resonant strings. And then this 12-string guitar played by Roger Talroth. Olav Johansson and Mikael Marin are the guys in that group, and sometimes they have a percussionist named Andre Ferrari, but they were on a label out of Minnesota called Northside, and that was the only way you could get them was through the Northside label, so there were like 18 record shops in the U.S. that you could get them from.
Right.
And I think to this day they're some of the most incredible musicians I've ever heard in my life. And whether or not I think you're a folk music fan or a European folk music fan, it would be difficult to listen to their first couple records, particularly the one with the percussionist Andre Ferrari on it, which I don't know what it's called now. It used to be called World, but it's not on Northside anymore. Anyway, I think it would be impossible if you were a real music fan to listen to that and be like, well, these guys suck, right? I mean, you could be like, I'm not into
Not
this.
my greatest, yeah,
Right.
I'm not the biggest fan, but I appreciate it.
Right.
You know, that's what we always, no genre's off limits here.
Yeah.
And that's what I love, and that's why we kind of like doing the Forever Fives. You hear people's, shit that I've never heard of.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go listen to. And like I said, we'll have a playlist. And
Yeah.
We'll include your Forever Five and other shit we talk about.
So I would say for me, it's Hum. I would say Vesson is number one. Hum would be in that kind of 2 through 4 spot. A band called the Drovers out of Chicago. I loved and still love to listen to. Although I don't think they've cut a record in 20 years or more.
I had one like that, Agents of Good Roots. They cut one album,
Yeah.
loved it,
Yeah.
been around forever. I saw, holy shit, they're like playing a thing. Next thing you know, we actually had them on our show.
Yeah,
He's like one of the lead
that's awesome.
singer. I sent him a text or an email.
That's
like, hey,
awesome.
reaching out. My phone rings at work the next day. I'm like, not answering that. Virginia. And then all of a sudden I get a voicemail. I was like, hey, this is Andrew Wynn from Agents of Good Roots. Yeah, I'll be on your show. I'm like, all right, sweet. I don't know if it'll work, but we'll try it.
The Drovers I got into because there was a video store in the town I grew up in called Diamonddale near here.
Okay.
Actually, I got this on my mug right now. They were cool. It was a young couple that owned it. And I would come in there because they would get promo CDs, soundtracks for movies. And you guys will absolutely remember that in the 90s, some of the dopest stuff you could buy were soundtracks
They're the
from
best.
Judgment Night,
Train
Singles, Train Spotting.
Crow.
It just
Forrest Gump.
fucking Spawn,
Right.
right? Was
Oh,
cool.
I like your pick.
Like, why was Spawn cool? You know what I mean? It just was.
Right.
And that was like the soundtrack time. So they knew me, and they knew, I was a kid that didn't have a ton of money in the community. So I would stop by, and they would just give me these CDs to take home. And, if I gave them back, that was cool. And if I liked them, I could keep them. And there was a movie called Blink that had Madeline Stowe was in it.
Okay.
And it was about some like murder mystery that had to do with the fire department in like Boston or Chicago, someplace with a bunch of Irish people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And this band, the Drovers, was featured in that soundtrack.
Okay.
And never heard from again. But they did have a couple of records they put out, and just fucking great, man. Some of the live stuff you can get on Spotify is wild.
It's usually the first thing I do is I'll check them out on Spotify.
They have a cover of War Pigs on Spotify
nice.
that they play live that it'll blow your mind. It's amazing, man.
Cool.
So yeah, Hum, Vesson, the Drovers. I honestly would say probably Pearl Jam no code.
We're not going to hold it to you.
You're right.
Hold it to it. I mean,
And
shit changes.
And then just in terms of being influential on like how I operate as a person, you know what I mean? I think Pearl Jam and the way they were like, look, fame is cool and everything, but we're not going to cut another music video. That's not what we're here to do. Right? We're here to make fucking cool music, and that's what we're going to do.
Right. And the one thing I always liked about them, you remember when they would release each live show?
Yes.
Like the next day.
Yeah, like the
pretty
Dead.
much.
Yeah.
Right. And so you could go and get yours, or you could go and get the others. Like, that's so much cooler than doing like a fucking video or something.
Right.
You
And
know?
they
your true fans can get something.
And look who's still around to this day out of all those guys, man. Right? Pearl Jam. Whether, I'm probably not going to go see them again either, but they're still got a career,
They're still doing it. I mean, they're actually the last album better than probably the last couple.
Right.
Top to bottom or whatever. But
same.
Yeah.
And then I would say, again, like you, man, the 2 through 5 are all interchangeable. Would be Big Head Todd and the Monsters. But and I wouldn't turn off a Big Head Todd and the Monsters tune if it came on my Spotify mix or whatever, ever. But their first record they made on a 2-track live when they were just playing in like Boulder and down in the Rocky Mountains like that, Midnight Radio, I think that's one of the rawest, purest, best, straight 3-piece rock and roll band records ever.
I love that you said that. I actually just saw them on
Yeah.
their 40th in Grand Rapids at the intersection.
Yeah.
First of all, really cool venue.
Yes, for sure.
And they were so good. 40 years later,
They're
Todd
fucking good.
Parkmore still shreds it on the guitar. But his voice.
Yes.
And my wife said he may be the best live singer I've ever seen in concert. And he still has it.
And it doesn't, the wild thing about him, I mean, you might not agree with this. The wild thing about him to me is that, like a lot of really great live bands, I am not a Fish fan at all, but my buddy Nate, my brewing partner, is a huge
I
Fish
get it.
fan, right? And he's like, you got to see him live. And I'm like, I don't even fucking want to, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to.
Right.
I also like to eat mushrooms occasionally. I'm not trying to go see Fish, right?
Right.
But, you know, he always says, you got to see him live, you got to see him live. And I think the thing about Big Head Todd and why Midnight Radio is so great is because that dude's voice, it doesn't translate in a studio situation the way that it
300%.
does live.
100%.
It just isn't even close, man.
No, I agree.
Like whatever it is, the pathos and the. I was thinking about this the other night because you sent this, and I put on Midnight Radio on I was running kids around or whatever for 40 minutes, where you're sitting in a parking lot for half the time.
Your other job, the Uber driver.
Yeah, right. And right, because 2 of mine are teenagers now. And
Wait till they drive. It's like you love it, but then you're terrified every time they leave.
yeah, my oldest.
Then you still love it.
Yeah, my oldest is 15, man. We're
Yeah,
getting
you're
there.
getting
He's doing it. But anyway, so I was sitting around and listening to Midnight Radio, and I still think in these terms a lot because playing music was so important to me for so
Right.
long, And I don't remember, it might have been the Moose song or one of the, it doesn't really matter. You pick your song on that record. And Todd Parkmore, lead singer and guitar player for the folks listening, lights into the solo. And this dude is not a technical wizard by any means. He's kind of sloppy, Jimmy
Right.
Pagey, you know what I mean? But goddamn, the thought that I had in my mind, the only thing I could do to explain why I like that record so much is in all of the 100 gigs that I ever played, right? And all of the dozens that I'm really proud of. I don't know if there was one night, one moment where I could have lit a solo like that off with that same just deep energy and just fucking amazing delivery. Like, and that dude does that. He do that at 7 a.m. in the morning before he drinks coffee.
Yeah, and it looks so effortless for him, too,
Right.
when he's shredding on that thing.
Right.
When he breaks out. I mean, it is. It's.
And it's, he's not tapping and doing this polyphia stuff, but it's
And
amazing.
you're right. It's seeing them is a totally different experience, 100%. And I will go back to like the jam band thing. I'm not a huge Fish fan or
Right.
anything, but I went to see Goose.
Okay.
That was at GLC, that 20 Monroe in Grand Rapids. That venue was amazing.
Great sound,
never
I've
been
heard.
there. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And you walk up and they have like kind of a horseshoe upstairs.
It's awesome.
Oh man, it's so cool. But like to me, that band of all the jam bands I've seen blew everyone else away.
Goose. Yeah?
It's just,
I gotta check 'em out.
It was just their style was so smooth. They're not up there. They're just 4 dudes up there. It was a nice smooth style. A lot of it just jam and instrumental, but the vocals. And,
I don't know if you've noticed for me, man, a lot of and I mean, this is how you know you're old, right? So when I say new, I mean like in the last 20 years.
oh yeah, it could be 25 for me.
But a lot of the new bands that are like jam band circuity, that your wooks are gonna like, you know what I mean? Is they really are more about the song now than they used to be, right? It really, they don't tend to go so far out that you're like, okay, guys, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
it's time to wrap
We
it up.
don't need the 30-minute guitar solo.
Right. He's a great bass player, dude.
2 minutes is enough on the bass.
But these guys, these younger bands will really tend to kind of, they'll pull it in a lot more than those older jam bands did. And it just, to me, is a lot more meaningful. You know what I mean? Like, man, I might not be on the same trip you're on tonight, but if you can pull me in because of the passion you're putting into this.
That's the killer tune.
That's
talk
it,
About,
yeah.
And obviously, the 2 dudes part's easy, but the killer tune, I mean, for me, that's what it is. You go to the show, and you might see the same band 5 times. It might be a different song every time that hits you differently.
Right.
And if I go to the show with him or you, all 3 of us are probably have different ones. Will be like, oh my God, that song was my killer tune.
For sure.
And that's where that part comes from.
But that's why top 5s are tough, man. 'cause,
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
It's always tough.
we-
It's just
we-
fun. It's more fun to have that conversation.
we could also spend 2 hours talking about Gordon Lightfoot. I
Absolutely.
mean, whatever. There's
Right.
tons of the great stuff out
Right,
there.
absolutely. Did you get out to shows much anymore? I know you're busy.
Not
as
really,
hell.
man. No, I
we
don't.
We should pick one. Find one you want
Yeah.
to go. Let's head to one.
Yeah, sure.
And I just want to say, is I couldn't thank you enough for
Oh,
having
dude.
us here.
Yeah.
It has been awesome hearing the journey.
Yeah.
And for me, I'd love to someday, 15 years down the road,
Yeah.
be doing this.
Yeah.
Like you're doing your passion.
Yeah.
And seeing people, meeting people like you, and hearing your stories gives you kind of that little extra fire.
Yeah.
To get out there. And
You got to
do
keep it, dude.
Absolutely. You said it perfect. If you're not out there making, it's not going to be handed to you.
Right.
Yep.
I got this guy here. We support each other. And that's what
I don't
it's all
say
about.
much, but I'm here.
That's the support, man.
I'm a good supporter.
Yeah, man.
I'll always be
But
here.
anyway, this Two Dudes and Killer Tunes, season 3, live coming at you. We just had Travis Fritts with us, episode 1, live from Old Nation Brewery. Make sure you check it out. A lot of cool stuff coming up this year. Make sure you check out all the socials, YouTube, and all that shit. Peace.